On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, has the U.S. declared war on the IMO? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So the U.S. declaring war, not really a new topic at all. Some people would think that the U.S. declares war all the time, even though technically we have not declared war since 1942 on the nation of Romania. That's right, Romania. But this topic is of particular note because the U.S. is taking a stance against the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, based in London, England. Now, we've been talking a lot about military actions recently. I just was on Preston Stewart's channel talking about the U.S. and Venezuela. That Going Lethal video up there, you see, that was me on his channel. If you want to check it out, it's a good follow-on to the videos I've been doing on my channel. But this topic with the International Maritime Organization is a bit different. Now, the IMO is the UN, the United Nations shipping arm, and they pass laws and conventions that regulate the world's ships. Some of these are very beneficial, as we know, safety of life at sea, the Maritime Pollution Acts, very good for protecting the environment. However, the big issue that the IMO has been covering recently has to do with greenhouse gas emissions and trying to get the world's shipping fleet to a net zero status somewhere around 2050. And the Trump administration has taken a very different view toward that. We're going to look at that topic and break it down for you. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. This article over at G-Captain by Mike Schuller really sets it up. The International Maritime Organization's ambitious new policy measures are set to transform the shipping industry's approach to fuel consumption and emissions through success hinges on proper incentivization and penalty structures. According to a new insight brief from the Getting to Zero Coalition and Global Maritime Forums, the maritime sector is poised to become the first industry with globally binding greenhouse gas regulations and emissions pricing. Analysis based on the total cost ownership modeling and extensive stakeholder interviews reveals a clear trajectory towards zero emission fuels. The findings indicate that dual fuel ships operating on LNG and ammonia will dominate the market before the mid-2030s, with ammonia emerging as the most cost-effective option from 2037 onward. Then we have this story by Declan Bush over at Lloyd's List. IMO's framework's complexity is bad enough even without the politics. Few agree on what net zero framework will achieve 2 months from its likely adoption. Clearest view is the framework is deeply flawed, but progressives want to fix it rather than scrap it. Countries will try to negotiate the best results for their own industries. All right, Sal, what does all that friggin' mean? So the IMO has put together this FAQ. What is the IMO net zero framework? It refers to a new standard of international regulations aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions with a global fuel standard and a pricing mechanism. To become legally binding to the MARPOL Convention, it must go through several steps known as tacit acceptance procedures. The initial IMO net zero framework was approved by the Maritime Environmental Protection Committee in April 2025. I should note that the U.S. boycotted that meeting and did not participate in it. The draft legal text was then shared with members for review, aiming for a formal adoption at the upcoming session this month in October of 2025, and then to enter force 16 months later in March of 2027. It will cover all ships over 5,000 gross tons. These ships are responsible for over 85% of global shipping emissions. Ships' emissions are going to be measured using a metric called GFG fuel intensity, GFI, like we don't have enough acronyms already in this thing. It calculates how much greenhouse gas is emitted. To ensure that the measurements are accurate, they must be independently verified through a sustainable fuel certification scheme recognized by the IMO. So how does this framework work? Well, they set up a global system where ships, regardless of their flag, must use cleaner fuels or technologies. If fuel intensity is too high, they will pay a price according to the greenhouse gas they emit. Ships must report their GFG fuel intensity to the IMO each year. So there's another burden here on top of ship operations. Each ship must keep its emissions below that standard. If ships exceed the threshold, it must balance the deficit by using either surplus units, these are transferred from other over-compliant ships or banked from previous years, or remedial units. Basically, we're talking about a carbon tax. This is the graphic provided by the IMO. You'll see there in green the direct compliance rewards for zero or near zero GHG emissions, technologies, fuels, and then you get into tier 1 deficits, where you have to purchase remedial units at the tier 1 rate, which is about $100 per their measurement. And then when you get into deficit tier 2, this is where you get into others where you have to basically transfer from other ships or banked units. And tier 2 is a higher penalty rate than you see at the tier 1 level. The penalties then go into the IMO Net Zero Fund, which will receive, manage, and disperse collective revenue for it. These revenues will be used to reward low-emission ships, support innovation, research, infrastructure, and just transition initiatives in developing countries, fund training, technology transfer, and capacity building to support the IMO strategy, and mitigate negative impacts on vulnerable states such as small island developing states and least developed countries. So I'm going to jump down to how this is going to be enforced. Enforcement of these regulations lie with the member states in their capacity as flag state or coastal states. So all member nations in the IMO are allowed what's called port state control, where they can go aboard ships that come within their territorial waters to inspect them. Under this, a government accedes to an IMO convention and agrees to make it part of its national law and enforce it just like any other law. A flag state must ensure that ships under its registry comply with the IMO's international rules and standards. A port state has the right to inspect foreign ships in national ports to verify its compliance. All member states are audited approximately every 7 years to ensure they are complying with IMO obligations. It is that last part where the Trump administration in the U.S. has the issue. They don't want U.S. ships to fall under this, and they don't want to be subjugating other ships to this standard. And this can cause a breakdown in the IMO regulations and overall port state control. The story by Mike Schuller back in August. Trump administration declares war on shipping net zero emissions plan, puts countries on notice over backing this plan. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, and Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy issued statements ahead of the IMO's October 2025 meeting, where the framework is scheduled for formal adoption. President Trump has made it clear that the United States will not accept any international environmental agreement that unduly or unfairly burdens the United States or harms the interests of the American people, reads the joint statement. The Trump administration's statement claims the framework would, quote, conveniently benefit China by requiring the use of expensive fuels unavailable at global scale. It further argues that the standards would, quote, preclude the use of proven technologies that fuel global shipping fleets, including lower emissions options where U.S. industry leads, such as liquefied natural gas and biofuels. The statement goes on, quote, the Trump administration unequivocally rejects the proposal before the IMO and will not tolerate any action that increase costs for our citizen energy providers, shipping companies, and their customers or tourists. We will fight hard to protect the American people and their economic interests. It concluded with what appears to be a direct warning to IMO members. Quote, our fellow IMO members should be on notice that we will look for their support against this action and not hesitate to retaliate or explore remedies for our citizens should this endeavor fail. So this is a kind of shot across the bow by the Trump administration about this greenhouse gas emission, this net zero framework that is going into place. Over at Lloyd's List, Richard Mead had this story. U.S. bid to derail IMO net zero agreement could be backed by tariff reprisals. Leaked documents appear to confirm that the U.S. trade agreements are being tied to votes against the IMO net zero plan in October. U.S. threats of reprisals against IMO member states remain unspecific, but political leverage is being applied. Campaign aims for a full rejection of the framework rather than negotiation. Then we get this story by Nick Savitas over at Sea Trade Maritime on September 4th. IMO member states tire of U.S. threats over climate rules. Member states are becoming weary of U.S. threats as State Department seeks to derail next month's IMO decarbonization vote. African member states are said to be tired of U.S. machinations, including the tariff wars, the cutting of U.S. AID, as Washington seeks to reverse the IMO's move to meet its climate targets. Nation-states and senior figures within the maritime sector are reluctant to speak out, fearing White House retribution, but privately, IMO member states, which have arrived at the state of agreeing substantial emission cuts via delegate negotiations over a decade, are reluctant to voice their concerns publicly. Member states are being careful not to wave a red flag in front of the bull, I will assume that is the United States, said one senior member who attends IMO debates. There is a concern to maintain momentum. Now, a State Department spokesman told Reuters that the U.S. was, quote, actively exploring and preparing to act on remedies, including tariffs, visa restrictions, and port levies before the MEPC extraordinary session takes place on 13 October for 5 days. This is where the net zero framework would be agreed to. According to Dutch officials, they were verbally warned of consequences should they back this deal. Privately, however, there is a concern that the U.S. could scupper, great maritime term right there, the framework with the initial vote at IMO requiring a two-thirds majority of member states, but also for those that vote to adopt the proposal should represent more than 50% of world tonnage. If you want 50% of world tonnage, Panama, Liberia, Marshall Islands, and Hong Kong do that, just 4 states. Now, the policy at the IMO meeting will be decided by the 108 members that have ratified MARPOL. This is the Marine Pollution Act, Annex 6. A two-thirds majority, 72 nations, will need to back the IMO proposal in the first instance. Then a calculation will be made as to whether those who approve the regulations represent 50% of the global tonnage. If China and Hong Kong vote to approve the framework, but the U.S. is successful in lobbying Liberia, Panama, and the Marshall Islands, who represent about 43% of the global tonnage, the U.S. may target smaller island states such as Malta and Cyprus, whose flags constitute 5.6 and 1.4% of the world tonnage. The United States is going to leverage quite a bit not to get this passed. You'll notice it was African states that are opposing this. Africa's states right now, their largest trading partners, not the United States, it is China. And what China is trying to do is get more of the 108 members on their side and get enough tonnage included in there so they can get over that two-thirds hurdle. This is going to be a big issue. If the net zero framework passes and it goes into effect 16 months later in 2027, then if the U.S. does not acknowledge this, number one, it's not going to enforce it in U.S. waters, but it's going to have a problem if it's enforced on U.S. ships. Now, U.S. ships represent a small majority of the global ships, less than 2%. So, but if it is enforced, that is going to be a problem. But what we can expect to force this vote is going to be threats of increased tariffs against nation states that vote in favor of this. We already saw this happen when India was forced to basically back away from Russian oil because tariffs were leveled at a much higher rate. We just had a statement out of India today from Prime Minister Modi talking about a new agreement between the U.S. and India on trade relations. We'll assume that there is some sort of agreement in place regarding Russian oil. This is going to be a big issue. This is going to be a big one. The U.S. does not like the idea of a global tax. The other one who benefits greatly by this is China. I can't tell you how much China benefits from this. Actually, I can, and I will right now. China benefits by this very simple. If you start creating issues like, for example, you need ammonia fuel or if you need hydrogen, that means you've got to start scrapping older ships and building new ships or converting ships over to those uses. Well, that means whoever the biggest shipbuilder in the world is benefiting greatly from that. And the biggest shipbuilder in the world right now is located right here in East Asia. There are 3 countries, Japan, Korea, but the biggest one of them all is China. China builds over 60% of the world's ships. They are stealing percentages from Japan and South Korea. They are the dominant force. If all of a sudden the global fleet in March of 2027 starts becoming uneconomical because of the fuel it burns, they've got to go get those engines either modified or build new ships. And if you're China and you've just announced the world's largest conglomerate incorporation of the 2 biggest shipyards on the planet, this is news for you. And this goes toward an American strategy about diminishing Chinese maritime influence. We saw that in the U.S. Trade Representative's report out there. Did a whole video on talking about this when the Trade Representative had his report out and how China is absolutely dominating the maritime sector. It was part also of the president's executive order, which we talked about too. So this is part of a larger strategy. The U.S. is finally kind of waking up to the IMO being important. It's a key organization out there because remember, it's regulating everything, not just beyond the 12-mile limit, but through the port state agreement memorandums, the enforcement of these rules are being done by the 108 member nation states around the planet. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. A lot to digest right there, but this is going to be a big issue which will not get attention until it hits the fan. If you enjoyed today's episode, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, you can go buy a carbon credit. No, don't do that. If you want to support the page, you can hit that super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. I appreciate everybody doing that. Hopefully this video will resonate with some. Until our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.